Seems there is not a day goes by when Donald Trump doesn't come out with something that isn't utterly unpresidential, and if it was anyone else, it would be remarkable. But because it's Donald Trump, I think we're almost used to it, and yet at the same time, it is shocking that someone in the office that he is in continues to say the things he does. Um, I'll say it right now. I think by some measure, Donald Trump is the worst president in American history. And that includes, there's been a few pretty bad presidents. It includes the famously corrupt Richard Nixon. It includes the corrupt administration of Warren G. Harding, thought to be one of the most corrupt in history. It includes the administration of Andrew Johnson, who scaled back civil rights after the American Civil War. All pretty low presidents. In the case of Nixon, Nixon at least had a certain statesmanship that Trump doesn't. Nixon had an intelligence that Trump doesn't. So yes, I put Nixon above Trump, despite his many bad points. But I just think Trump's in a uniquely awful ranking. I mean, the other thing about those 19th century presidents, thinking of Johnson and so on, America was still not at the level of a superpower. It was barely even a great power. So a lot of the policies were from a domestic perspective. Donald Trump is in a position to be a world leader. I don't think I'm reluctant to even call him a world leader, but by virtue of his office, he is, and yet he completely and utterly degrades America's role in the world. It's just astonishing. So today he had a meeting in the Oval Office with the new Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. And once again, Trump repeated the narrative about Canada being an American state. This was in response to a journalist's question. You know, what strikes me is there was always a bit of banter between the United States and Canada over hockey, over, being the two big North American powers along with Mexico. Um, there was always a bit of well-intentioned banter there. But I cannot think, at least not in modern times, of another occasion where an American president has seriously proposed Canada being a state. I'm sure um, Trump's predecessors, I'm sure Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush had moments where there were disagreements with the Canadians. But never has an American president said the things he said. And this isn't funny, this is an insult to sovereign nation. Carney was absolutely cool. He absolutely just refuted it. And he said, well, Mr. Trump, as you know, Mr. President, as you know, you're into real estate. This is not verbatim, but it's more or less what he said. Um, some things are just not, they're beyond sale, and Canada's not for sale. Um, and Trump actually had the cheek to come out and say never. Does he seriously think Does he seriously think that any Canadian Prime Minister, whether Tory or Liberal, are going to demolish themselves politically by just handing Canada over in some sort of sale? Does Donald Trump seriously think that a sovereign state, a great sovereign state, is just like a business acquisition? Is he seriously stupid enough and detached enough from reality to think that it works that way? It's just preposterous. But yeah, this isn't funny, even if it'll never happen, and it won't. I mean, Canada is not going to become an American state. But that doesn't matter. It's the fact that the American president thinks it's acceptable to talk this way, to insult his neighbors this way. And in his justification for it, he came out with this narrative about supposedly his parent, he had great affection for Canada, and his parents had Canadian friends, and he was praising Wayne Gretzky and all of this. And he claimed to get great healthcare. Millions of Americans can't afford healthcare. Millions of Americans are in a very bad position regarding healthcare. He then spoke about military assistance. That's an insult to the Canadian Armed Forces. Dozy Donald would also do well to look at history because on many occasions Canada has come to the assistance of the United States. During the Iranian hostage crisis, this was featured in the film Argo. In fact, it wasn't. That was one of the criticisms of the film Argo. But that operation was also known as the Canadian Caper because it involved a covert operation in alliance with the Canadians to get the American hostages out of Iran during the Islamic Revolution. And it was called the Canadian Caper because of the assistance of, I believe it was Pierre Trudeau at that time. Um, and may have been actually John Clark, but regardless, it was the Canadians that were assisting in that. During 9/11, thousands of diverted flights, many passengers were diverted to Canada. And there was a small town in Newfoundland that actually local people put up international passengers in their home. It's the Canadians understood that was an exceptional situation. The United States was under attack. They were doing what they could to help. Um, and perhaps most gravely, during the US led war on terror, many Canadians laid down their lives in Afghanistan. Canadian servicemen laid down their lives alongside their American, British, and other international partners in that conflict. So for Trump to just come out with the stuff he's coming out with, it is a gross insult to them. One thing it has done, I think, is um, unite may be the wrong word because there'll still be domestic differences, but in a sense, yes, unite the Canadian right and left because no self respecting Canadian and no Canadian politician would ever concede an inch to Donald Trump because they would look unpatriotic if they did. I think that's probably why Mark Carney just won re-election because he took a strong stance on this from the start, and I give him credit for that. I'd like to see more Western leaders standing up to Donald Trump. It's interesting that we've sort of seen the state visit that's supposed to be going ahead. It may no longer be a state visit, and it's definitely been kind of quietened down, whether it's been pushed back or it's a bit unclear at the moment what exactly is happening. But I think both the King and Keir Starmer know that Donald Trump is deeply unpopular in this country. And if you doubt that, just look at any report on this issue, and you'll say universally, I'm talking about British sources, BBC, ITV, universally it's criticising Trump with one or two exceptions. Of course, Britain has a few Trump cultists, deluded people, in my opinion, very deluded people. Um, but this comes in the same week that Donald Trump shared that pathetic image of him in papal attire. Now, he didn't create it, but he shared it. Lindsey Graham, one of Trump's main lackeys, actually said Catholics should keep an open mind. And they think this is funny. This is still a period of sede vacante, i.e., official mourning. Conclave begins tomorrow, but for Trump to put that out as if it's a trivial thing, as if it's funny, it's an insult to millions of Catholics. And then he had the narcissism and the arrogance to claim that Catholics found it funny. No, they didn't. Catholic organizations in the United States sharply rebuked that because it was insulting. I may imagine how we would feel in the UK if he had an image of himself as the king in the mourning period for Elizabeth II. It would be absolutely just bad taste, doesn't even cover it. Then we look at the case of Abrigo Garcia, the man who was sent to El Salvador. Trump has been exposed for elaborating supposed MS-13 gang insignia on his knuckles. It's widely believed to be photoshopped. The President of the United States has actually smeared an innocent man to justify him being taken illegally to another country. Um, Incidentally, my views of the Salvadorian president has went down with that. The fact he's gone along with it, although he locks up thousands of people in human battery cages without due process. Now, I'm not naive. El Salvador has a serious, this may be for another video, but El Salvador has a chronic crime problem. And yes, the president had to do something about that. And yes, even in the United States, I never criticize Trump for purportedly taking action against gang members, but not when it's an innocent man, not when the president of the United States doctors an image. That is an absolute disgrace. And the thing is, all of Trump's lines about cracking down on crime might actually be believable if they weren't so inconsistent. Remember, Donald Trump has pardoned criminals. Donald Trump pardoned violent criminals who injured dozens of police officers. Trump pardoned them. Indeed, Donald Trump himself is a criminal. That's why the narrative that he's just doing this to keep Americans safe, it just wears a little bit thin. Um, he wanted to open Alcatraz this week again. It's been a museum for 60 years. That's expensive. I don't really see what purpose it serves. I mean, I don't know how big a facility it is in terms of um, how many prisoners it can hold, but the point is, it's been a museum for 60 years. Converting a museum it back into a prison doesn't just happen overnight. It would be an expensive um, move. In Trump land, that's relatively minor, but it just shows where he is. And the shocking thing is, he still has another 3 years and what, 8 months, 9 months. It's how much more can this man come out with? How much more can he polarize the United States? I think a big mistake that a lot of Western countries have taken are pandering to Trump. You know, treading carefully. We better not offend him. I think it's the wrong move. I think, you know, Trump is a bully, and I think the old story with bullies is if you stand up to them, more often than not, they back down. Um, I absolutely don't think that any sort of visit should be going ahead anytime soon. Um, for once, I agree with Rachel Reeves. She said that the European Union may well be a much more important trading partner than the United States. And for once, I agree with her. I don't think she's a great chancellor. I don't like her pandering to China. I don't like her treatment of disabled claimants, but that's something. I'll leave it there, but I honestly think at this point, anyone who forcefully defends Donald Trump, and I'm not talking about people who want to be open minded and they play the devil's advocate a little bit and say, oh, he's right about some things. I'm talking about people who will go out of their way to forcefully defend him. To my mind, those people are only fall into two categories. They're either thoroughly stupid or they're just morally bankrupt. That's the shocking thing. Not everyone who supports Trump is stupid. I know intelligent people who support Trump, and in some ways they're worse because they have the intelligence and they have the sources and they have everything else to know better, yet they still defend this disgraceful figure. And I just think they're sellouts. I think they're a disgrace. Um, That's it. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 3 years, 9 months. I don't know how much more damage Trump can do. I think far from making America strong, he's utterly damaged America's international reputation. Um, he has the worst polling of any president in the first 100 days. He is an absolute disgrace. He's not fit to be president of the United States. And I'll say one last thing. These people who are coming out now and saying they regret voting for him, well, you took a very different attitude when you were gloating at so-called liberal tears. I'm afraid I'm a little bit skeptical of those people. I think they're just a bit selfish. I think they've realized that Elon Musk's so-called Doge program has actually ended up hurting a lot of them. Um, I think they've realized actually it isn't, it wasn't what's said on the tin. Um, I don't have a lot of sympathy for them. Instead of feeling sorry for themselves, they should take some of the blame. Trump wouldn't be back in office if it wasn't for getting and we can't even say it was a fluke of the electoral college. He did get the popular vote this time. So the sad reality is that the majority of voting Americans put this man back into office. So I do sympathise with decent Americans who know what Trump is, who stand against him. Um, and unfortunately, some people will tar all Americans with the same brush. I think that's wrong. But the reality is, it isn't a majority of Americans. It is a majority of Americans who put him back into power. That's the reality. Despite everything that happened in his first term, you would think that, the first term you could dismiss it as a fluke. He was a salesman. There was discontented institutions. There's a lot of reasons why Trump went into power the first time around. The second time, even after what happened in 2021, he still got back into power. Now, to me, that doesn't say much for the American electorate that these those who put him back into power. So they can't really say, "Oh, we didn't know any better." You were told, you were warned, and your attitude was to gloat at so-called liberal tears. So take some responsibility for putting him back into power.